Hi everyone, we're going to look at policy making today. And when you think about public policy, it's really a broad term. Public policy is anything the government chooses to do or not do. So as it says, it pervades our everyday lives, and of course it does, because there's so much the government does, and there's really a lot that the government tends not to do. And as I tell all of my students when it comes to policy making, whether it's at the foreign level or the national level, in order to come up with a policy, you have to identify a problem first. And once you identify a problem, it has to be placed on the agenda for a discussion by either your local, state, or your federal leaders. And then once you get on the agenda, you have to formulate, or as it says here, you have to get into a policy formation period, where we start to figure out the pros and cons of the issue itself. We try to rough out, or I should say smooth out, the rough edges that you find in policies. And then we're going to adopt the policy, we are going to implement the policy, and then we're going to evaluate to see if the policy actually worked. And no matter what decisions that we make as individuals, the government does the same thing. Every decision that we make, we always think about the costs and the benefits. Well, that's the same thing that happens in policy making. What is the cost and what is the benefit to this policy being, if it is actually placed into action? And there are many different forms of policy. So you might have heard of the phrase domestic policy. You also might hear the phrase economic policy and how that works in the United States. Fiscal policy is when the government taxes and spends your money. And usually in our fiscal policy, the United States runs a deficit to pay for all of its programs. And when you add all of the deficits together, we get a national debt. Monetary policy is different from fiscal policy. Monetary policy is all about making money available to the public. How much money do we pump into the system? And then other types of policy would involve foreign and defense policy. Foreign policy is when we have plans and decisions that our leaders make in relation to our country's goals and objectives in dealing with nations of the world. Defense policy deals more with the military. One of our earliest forms of foreign policy was the Monroe Doctrine. In the late 19th century, we expanded our foreign policy to include more of an economic perspective. As the Cold War began after World War II, both the United States and the Soviet Union possessed a large nuclear arsenal. And in recent years, our discussion about foreign policy and defense policy has involved terrorism. And no matter if it's a Democrat or Republican running the country, the most important national security goal of any nation and its leaders is maintaining the security in the face of threats. We would call this our national interest.